This government has consistently been far too wedded to basically a treasury view of the world, in which everything is about balancing the books right now and not thinking about where you're going to be in a few years' time. And lo and behold, every year the books don't really balance properly because the economy is in a bad place. You haven't done the big, difficult decisions like how are we actually going to start taxing the very wealthy in this country? How do you start to address these serious structural problems and instead thinking about a so-called smorgasbord of little tweaks forevermore?
We're really making it so difficult for businesses. They've got higher wages, they've got high electricity costs, they've got business rates, they've got high rents, and everyone is just going, well, bad luck, I'm out of here.
Hello and welcome to the Fourcast and the first of our in-depth looks at the budget, which is just days away. Now, Rachel Reeves is facing a monumental task. The public finances are still facing a black hole after she failed to keep enough aside last year, despite raising taxes by £40 billion. After raising expectations of a manifesto-busting rise in income tax, it has now been widely reported that she's changed her mind and will instead go for a smorgasbord of tax rises and spending cuts, which will hit different people in different ways. But critics to the left and the right believe this will fail to address what they see as the deeper structural rot in Britain's economy. So today we've got two economists with radically different visions for how to turn the country around. James Meadway was chief economic advisor to Labour left-winger John McDonnell and now supports the Green leader Zach Polanski, arguing that inequality is choking growth and that only a major recess of wealth, investment and industrial strategy can revive the UK. Catherine McBride served on the last Tory government's Trade and Agricultural Commission. She's argued in favour of tax cuts, deregulation, and to abandon net zero climate targets. And our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, is here with me to help us explore all of these ideas. And Helia, let's start with just how shaky the ground is. I mean, I don't remember a run-up to a budget that has been so rocky in terms of trying to plant thoughts in our minds and the market's minds about what to expect in the budget, then apparently a complete U-turn on the U-turn. It's chaotic politically, but is that an indicator of how difficult the job is?
It's difficult because it hits all three problems. It's economically difficult because you've got this big downgrade in Britain's economic output and productivity by the OBR. You could argue for the Chancellor that that's not particularly her fault that it's happening now. You've got this politics erupting. And third, and finally, because your markets are so fragile, Krish, you've got to land this budget in a market where borrowing costs have gone up massively, and you've got to have a credible argument that you can essentially collect enough revenue to do the kind of spending that you're talking about. And that is the central problem.
Well, we have with us two people who have got very, very different views of what is fundamentally wrong. And let's just get those out first so that we know where each of you are coming from. I mean, James, am I right in saying inequality is where you start?
It would be one of the starting points. I mean, look, there's a whole set of things that have gone wrong here. I mean, look, counterintuitively, I'm going to say what I think Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng got right, which is that you need to do something big, and we're in a hole and you need to do something big to get out of it. The answer they came up with was wrong. But a big thing would not be thinking about what the Treasury spreadsheet looks like of all these little tax rises and fiddling about and little bits here and there, and maybe you can squeeze a little bit of a tax relief here and a little tiny cut over there. The smorgasbord is a Treasury spreadsheet behind it. You need a clear sense of political direction on this. You need a narrative to what the government is doing, something it's never really had, by the way. I mean, Rachel Reeves talks vaguely about growth. Part of the reason that bond markets look askance at this government is because it isn't very clear about what it's going to be doing other than crossing its fingers and hoping for the best on growth. So there needs to be a clear story about what we're doing. One part of that story would be saying, how do we address severe inequality? How do we address the fact that you have a very large amount of wealth piling up at the top and most people really feeling the pinch, which, by the way, increasing taxes on most people will simply add to that problem and, of course, add to the kind of stagnation I think we're starting to see in the economy.
Right, but going into the budget, do you think we should be looking at a range of tax rises? I mean, we'll get into measures, specifically wealth taxes and things like that in a moment. But
you need to be looking at raising more money, but it's a question of where from. And that is, standard Treasury answer is go for the really easy things from their point of view, which is talking about raising income tax, for instance, talk about changing national insurance contributions. I have to say, I think the employer national insurance contribution hike last year is one of the contributing factors to a problem we're seeing with employment coming into this year, that this government has consistently been far too wedded to basically a Treasury view of the world in which everything is about balancing the books right now and not thinking about where you're going to be in a few years' time. And lo and behold, every year we're now going through this process where the books don't really balance properly because the economy is in a bad place. You haven't done the big, difficult decisions that you ought to have done straight away, like how are we actually going to start taxing the very wealthy in this country? How are we going to start taxing some of the profits that banks have been making over the last few years on the back of interest rate rises? How do you start to address these serious structural problems and instead thinking about a so-called smorgasbord of little tweaks forevermore?
Okay, before we start picking it apart, Catherine, I mean, you come at this from a very different position, don't you?
We need to do big things. I'm with him that all of this little tiny tax changes here and there don't do anything. I agree as well that it's her tax raises, and not just her. Sunak's fixing of the tax thresholds is killing the economy. You know, you can see that they have raised $7 billion more in September this year than they raised in September last year, just from fiscal drag. So they gave everyone these pay rise. Most of it is going in taxes. So people are getting a very small amount out of what looked like an above inflation rate of a wage rise. And then the inflation rate's been pushed up because you saw that general inflation is down slightly from 3.8 to 3.6, but food inflation is up by 4.6%, which is really hitting the man in the street, or the woman in the street, the woman in the supermarket. And that is purely because of the increase in the minimum wage and the employer's national insurance, which is added onto it. So when you push up the minimum wage and make the employer's national insurance contribution 15% of that, then you're sort of, it's a double whammy. And if you look at the food from farmer to supermarket shelf, there are so many minimum wage jobs involved, from picking, processing, packing, packaging, deliveries, shelf stockers, people working on the tills. Every one of those jobs just went up. And that's why we've got this massive inflation problem, which pushes up the yield on bonds. That's what's killing Rachel Reeves. I mean, the interest we are paying on debt is ridiculous.
£110 billion we're expected to pay today. And I think most people don't realise that what we're paying in debt interest is more than many of the departments that we're spending on. Yeah. And it's that disconnect.
More than most of them, isn't it?
More than most of them. More than defence, more than education. I mean, you'd have to get to health to actually be outstripped. But I think what you were talking about, where it's the Mervyn King has made, the former governor of the Bank of England, has made this observation as well, that the problem you have with creating fiscal rules which are supposed to keep the government honest is that you become completely myopic about balancing the books, about making the numbers work, rather than thinking what is the long-term strategy for this policy.
Right. I mean, so you're both in a way saying don't obsess about balancing the books in a nitty-gritty way, but from slightly different positions, I think.
I'm not sure what James thinks, but the taxes I would cut first, because the real problem is there's a lot of things you could do to try and lower government spending, but they will take a long time to come through.
Catherine, do you think we pay too much personal taxation?
Yes, I do. In the income tax and the taxes that people can't avoid, we're raising more just because of fiscal drag. So that we've moved, because of inflation, people have been given wage rises, but so much of that puts them into a higher tax bracket. They're paying more in tax. But if you look at the consumption taxes, the cigarette tax, the tax on spirits, tax on wine, all of those are down from September last year. So people are spending less, and we're really making it so difficult for businesses that they've got higher wages, they've got higher electricity costs, they've got business rates, they've got high rents, and everyone is just going, well, bad luck, I'm out of here. The core of the domestic economy is small business. The export economy is big business, but the domestic economy is small business. They employ most of the people. And we have made it so expensive for them to employ people. And everyone is frozen now waiting for the budget. And by delaying it, they've just made everyone stop. Everyone's not doing anything till they find out if their taxes are going up.
Okay, well, James, I mean, the big taxes you want to raise are on the richest.
Yes.
What do you want to do?
Well, wealth tax and opening up the question of the wealth tax would be a sensible start to this. And that you'd have to consider it as a start. I mean, this isn't like something you do that magically resolves all your problems. But if you're talking about the kinds of sums that credible analysis have put out about how much a relatively small annual percentage charge on very wealthy people, so if you have more than £10 million net, let's say, you're talking 10 to 20 billion, that sort of range, depending on the schemes you're looking at. This gets you a long way towards the kinds of sums we'd need to be looking at. Now, I don't view this as all you'd want to do. I don't think you have an economy that functions particularly well by exploiting this kind of perverse one-off advantage that we have a lot of inequality and a lot of wealth not doing very much that you can put to work. I mean, that's kind of what we want to happen here. The longer-term plan for this is back to both of us agreeing with each other. The core of the economy is small businesses. The core of the economy every day when you go out to work, when you go and see what's happening out there, you go to the shops, it's a small business likely as not. What do you do to support those local economies? That, to me, and this is where we'll disagree, I think, is a question of demand for sure. That's how much money people have in their pockets. But that's not just taxes that people are paying. That's also food prices, which, by the way, we import 50% of our food. So it's not a question of just saying, OK, this is because we're paying a few people working in fields here too much. This is a problem of profiteering elsewhere in the supply chain. These are really, really big problems. If you want to start to think about how you address them in your high street, I would start by saying, how do you get most people to have more money? How do you get a pay increase to most people? That doesn't necessarily mean cutting taxes.
The government has done that, actually.
Exactly,
They have raised the minimum wage, and that is part of what companies actually complain about. When you go on the street, when you talk to those small companies, they're not just complaining about the tax raise that you saw in national insurance, employer national insurance last year. They also complain that the minimum wage going up has made it more expensive to employ people. And it's not just the cost of it, it's employer rights bill, which is a big Labour policy. And I think, Krish, going back to your first question, it's about, does the vision for the economy, is it coherent? And do the policies conflict? If you say you want lots of investment because you want people to build and you're taking a bet on productivity and AI, is it credible if you don't have the energy resources to do it? If you say you want businesses on side, is it credible if it makes it more expensive to hire people? And I think those are the kind of on-the-ground realities that Labour have come unstuck with.
Right, but if we can just focus on the wealth tax idea, I mean, why does the government not believe the numbers that James and Zach Polanski and others put out? Because they always say it wouldn't raise that much.
One of the problems you have with wealth tax is that people say it cannibalizes itself because it essentially, people learn how to either put their wealth somewhere else, they leave the country, and so the amount of money that you actually end up raising is much less than forecast. There are countries that do have wealth taxes, and those wealth taxes are not huge amounts of revenue. So I think when you're talking about what are the intractable problems for Britain, you have to think, are we trying to grow the economy? Is this about the pie, or has this just become about distribution? And that is the problem. What the government had hoped was it's about growing the pie. Okay. Growth will get us out of this, and that hasn't quite materialised.
Well, it's growth from where? I mean, the problem the government has had in all of this is that, as far as I could tell, their plan was roughly, we will be in charge and businesses will like this and then economic growth will happen. And honestly, I don't think there was very much more to it than that. Like, if they had done the big, harder reforms straight away, Rachel Reeves, as Chancellor, in a government with a huge majority, got an incredible amount of leeway to do some stuff that may even make you quite unpopular. And what she did was pop up and say, hey, I want to do some stuff that's going to be unpleasant, and then do nothing for a few months until the budget, right? It was just this bizarre period. That was exactly when you could have said, okay, this is when we introduce the wealth tax. This is when there's a big push on minimum wages. I mean, I do think on the national insurance contributions for employers, it was bizarre to have Rachel Reeves standing up and saying, you know, we're whacking up national insurance contributions contributions that all employers are paying, but then boasting about corporation taxes still being amongst the lowest in Europe. And this is completely the wrong way around. Like, if you're going to tax the businesses that actually have the money, which is the big businesses,
and
not the
to
small
your
businesses.
argument of that you get fixated on trying to make the numbers work, and you think if you make the numbers work, then it will sort itself out. But actually, the policy on the ground is
But what's your answer to the
counterproductive.
basic criticism of wealth tax, which is that people find ways to minimise the amount that you end up
Of course,
raising?
and that's built into your estimates for, figures here from Aaron Advani at Warwick University, an expert in these things. The estimates you get take account of that behavioural impact, the fact that you're going to get a number of people, because they're very wealthy and sophisticated in that financial way, they're going to try and find ways to get around it.
So
But
you
it
still
doesn't mean
think
you lose all of
1% on assets above a certain amount would raise 10 to 20 billion?
Yes, you still raised, allowing for that behavioural impact.
Catherine?
Now,
I disagree entirely. Almost every country in Europe that's tried a wealth tax has got rid of it, except for Norway, and Norway's one
and Switzerland.
And Switzerland.
And Spain.
Spain.
Yeah.
Spain's got one?
Yeah, Spain has one. Yeah.
Doesn't raise.
No,
These are
they
not
raise-
big
no, I
revenue
know, I
raisers.
know, they
It should
raise
be
nothing.
absolutely
But
clear.
A few billions of euros,
They're
right?
very hard to actually police.
Lots
See,
of people
how do you
think
work
property
out-
taxes in this country are wildly out of date and deeply
yes.
unfair. I think what hasn't materialised is a credible policy to update property taxes in a
that's-
way that people do think
But
is fair,
in
so that
terms
you
of a
have
wealth tax, that would be probably the wealth that James is going to tax,
Well,
because it can't
property and
move, it can't
financial
leave.
assets and things, yes.
If you try and tax someone's cash in the bank, then I give it about 5 minutes
And I
before
think-
that cash in the bank is in Switzerland. You know, it's
and that's what the kind
Cayman
of
Islands
the
or wherever,
squeezed
you know.
middle complain about,
Yes,
isn't it?
exactly.
That they are law-abiding citizens, and so they
and
get
it will
stuck.
hit a lot of
But
small businesses who own their premises. And that's the same with this inheritance tax that they brought in. Because if you own the corner shop, that's your business, and that will be part of the inheritance tax, the value of the corner shop. So people who presently own their corner shop, some of them may even live in it, they will be the ones hit the hardest with inheritance tax, even though they were not the people intended to be taxed.
James,
The wealth taxes, the first one is, look, this is why you set a high barrier to entry on it. You say, okay, it's £10 million rather than like it's going to capture every corner shop in the whole country. This does not seem to me like a sensible way to do it. But the other bit is like the fact that something is difficult and that rich people don't necessarily all want to pay this. And let's overstate that, by the way. There is a group out there called patriotic millionaires of people saying they want to pay the taxes. In Iceland, every year they kind of crown a tax king or queen who's the person who's paid the most tax because they have a publicly searchable record.
the British
of it.
public, I feel, are not.
Maybe
are
we're not there yet, but
asking
let's
for
not
a
overdo.
crown.
Let's not overdo the
Right
fact that
now.
every single multimillionaire out there is just itching to leave the country. There's slightest, marginal increase in the amount of taxes they pay. First one. The second thing is that if it's difficult, this isn't a reason not to do it. We have a very efficient government department in the form of Revenue and Customs. They're pretty good at working out how much money people and companies have. They have specialist expertise in that. One of the things this government has got right, by the way, is beefing up that specialist expertise. So if you want to know how much value someone has and how much property there is actually worth and what they own, then fine, we can get tax inspectors to do that. And we can make sure that this is done properly and it's done effectively and efficiently by the very good people at Revenue and Customs, and you start to raise the money. That's how
it does
works.
seem a slightly odd objection to wealth taxes that, well, the rich are just better at avoiding tax legally than everybody else. So it's too difficult.
Well, that's what France discovered, and France got into this much before anyone else, because the rich probably don't hold their assets in their own name. They will hold it in a family trust, or they'll hold it in a company. They'll hold it in an offshore company. They will find a way to hold their assets, to preserve their assets, which is why they're rich in the first place. The aspiring middle class will get hurt by this because they don't really know how to protect themselves. And if it doesn't raise a lot of money, we started saying don't do the nitpicky things, go for the big taxes that raise the most money. And now we're talking about introducing another level of tax, which will just be a boon to tax accountants. I can guarantee you there'll be another layer of tax accountants in London.
And it's when politics becomes about messaging. So instead of getting a big revenue raiser, you create tax policies that tell your base or tell a particular part of your party that you are doing something, you are against a particular group of people. And that can be, obviously, if you've got a vision for the economy, that's where the contradictions happen. But
It is also anti-aspiring. So if you're a young person and you're doing your new computer business or whatever, they're already moving to list in New York. We've already seen IPOs have just disappeared in London. Everyone goes to New York to do their IPO. If we've got a wealth tax here and you don't have a wealth tax in New York, where are you going to do your IPO? It's going to take them 2 seconds to go, we're going to New York. There are some things we can do to get business to grow. Now, if James is helping the Green Party, he might not like this, but I'm very much against the energy profits levy. And the first thing the Labor government should have done, because it is really hitting traditional Labor voters who used to work in the oil and gas industry and work in all of the manufacturing industries that hang off that, they should have just said that was a really stupid Sunak idea, nothing to do with us, Gov, we're out of here, because the oil and gas industry already paid 40% tax when everyone else was paying 19%. And that extra tax was as a payment to the government for the rights, the mineral rights, if you like. And that worked for everyone. So we had very big industries working out of the UK. Now we've closed that industry down. So this additional tax, which has taken their tax rate from 40% to 78%, which they said was a windfall, but the actual price has come down. So people have they've stopped producing oil and gas in the UK. Instead, we're importing it from Norway. And we're importing it from Norway with money we don't actually have. It's crazy. Trade should be balanced. And the one thing the UK should not need to import is oil and gas. And instead, we are doing that. Now, if you want to have a green economy, and I don't mind that, we can do what Norway does, because Norway exports its gas because it doesn't use it itself. It gets hydroelectric power in the same way we could get more wind power or do more nuclear and export our gas. This is a big industry, or it used to be one of our big industries.
James?
Well, the fundamental problem with the oil and gas that we face, and Norway faces as well, is that production in the North Sea has been declining since about 1999, 2000. That's when it peaked, right?
That's actually not true.
That is true. So that's what's happened with production over a period of time.
The Norwegian one has increased. The UK went down because we stopped allowing people to get new licenses.
On the gas side, Norway has got a little bit more out of some of its fields, but this is a declining, aging field. It's the hard sort of physical facts. The geology of the thing is that after a while, it gets harder and harder to get the oil and gas out of any given field because you've got all the easy stuff, and that's what we're running into with the North Sea.
That's the first part. That's true, actually.
So that is what's happened with the North Sea, because really we've been, it's like the late 1960s, the first sort of drillings took place there, right? So it's an old field, and it's a hard field to get things out of because it's underwater, right? So it's difficult and expensive necessarily
have gas
to do
on
that.
Ground as well.
The thing we could have done, although this is a bit of you wouldn't want to start from here, the thing that we should have done is instead of allowing from the late 70s, early 80s onwards a free-for-all, one of the lowest tax fields anywhere on the planet is what we had in the North Sea, and allowing those profits to be made handsomely by people operating when it was a rising field, when you were getting more production out of it by the big oil and gas companies back in the 80s. This is something we shouldn't have done then. We should have been taking those profits. That should have been publicly owned resources and public money we could have used. We didn't do that. And then we didn't do what Norway did, which was set up in the early 1990s, a sovereign wealth fund to take at least some of that money and turn it into savings. That sovereign wealth fund that Norway has on the back of what it got out of the North Sea makes Norway one of the richest countries on the planet. This is one of the biggest investors in shares anywhere is now the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now, we could have had all that, but we didn't. And now we have a declining, mature field that you're not going to get much more out of, and a pressing requirement, I would say, to start to think about alternatives to oil and gas production, which is exactly the point of why you're looking at net zero.
Yes, we are.
And we should do more of it, of course.
No, but that doesn't mean we can't, sell our coal as everyone else who's got coal is selling coal. China's still using coal. India's still using coal. Germany and the Czech Republic and Poland are all using coal. We could supply them with that coal. Instead, they're burning lignite, which, as we both know, is the worst type of coal to burn. I don't believe the North Sea is running out of oil and gas. I know that there's a lot there.
The point is, Catherine, I mean, you actually think we should scrap all our net zero targets, don't you?
No. I want to get rid of the energy profits levy. It was a ridiculous
That's the only thing you would change?
Well, I think if you can get that
So you would
back,
keep the targets for 2050?
I would also, I think most targets are ridiculous. I think putting our targets into law is where we went wrong, because most other countries haven't done that. So they're all going, yeah, it's a nice idea, we'll work towards that, but no one is close to it.
But what are you saying it costs us to have these targets?
Enormous. Well, we've done three things. We converted our coal-fired electricity to gas, and that halved the emissions involved with electricity production. Then we got landfill under control, because methane from landfill is the next biggest source of carbon emissions, or carbon. It's actually methane emissions, but it breaks down into carbon dioxide. And then the third thing we did is we exported our industry to China, and then we gave ourselves a gold star. You know, manufacturing was 16% of the UK's economy in 2000, and it's now half of that. It's now 8%. And so when we say we halved our emissions, well, we also halved our
but what are you saying we should
manufacturing.
do? Solutions for the future. What are you saying we should do, and what would it save us?
Well, two of the biggest things that we have open on the table right now is big data centers, AI, and quantum computing. I've been at industry events in the last 2 weeks on that, and the big hold-up with all of those guys is the cost of our industrial electricity. Okay, we are the most expensive developed nation for industrial electricity. And the City of London, your TV studio, everything runs on electricity, and we have made that far too expensive, and a lot of it is taxation.
Okay, James.
It's a great legacy of privatisation, and the poor setup for privatisation in particular you get in the electricity markets. Like, there are solutions to this. It is ridiculous that we have a marginal pricing situation in electricity markets in this country, which is set by effectively the most effective electricity that can be sourced at the point of sale. If you had longer term contracts for electricity production, if you stripped out some of the attempts to generate profits from this system, then we could start to reduce seriously the amount that people face both at home when you have to pay for your electricity and major industrial users. On major industrial users, I mean, I think one of the problems the government is going to run into, I think fairly rapidly and is running into, is that it has really caught the bug on data centres without demonstrating very clearly what the economic benefits are to people in this country building these things, that you're talking very resource intensive facilities, 100 megawatt facility here, there and elsewhere, which employ maybe 100, 200 people, right? So the jobs benefit isn't there, but you're talking at the same time about the electricity costs of a town of 30,000 people. The case hasn't been made. And if you start to think, if you're Rachel Reeves sitting in the Treasury saying, well, let's build some data centres to get out of this hole, I'm sorry, this isn't going to be how the world works. What are you going to do about the real productivity challenge in this country, which sits there in a great mass of small businesses with lots of potential to do more, lots of local economies with potential to do more that have been starved of investment over the last 15 years or so? Why are we continually looking, if you're the Treasury, they keep talking about Oxford, Cambridge, London, that's where we're going to spend. Why not spending in the rest of the country? Why not building Crossrail for the north? Why not improving railway lines and bus services up and down the country? The small gains in productivity is what we should be thinking about, not big superstar, here's 100 billion or whatever crazy number it is for a data centre up in the northeast, for instance.
I want to give Catherine a chance to kind of pose another big idea sort of thing before we run out of time.
Well, one of the ones is deregulation, because it's sort of free. And that should appeal to Rachel Reeves, where if she can deregulate and just make it easier for a company to say, get a bank account, set up in the UK, list in the UK, change our listing rules, do some things that are pretty simple. You could raise money.
Aren't they doing a bit of that? Haven't they brought in someone from Amazon to be head of the CMA? I mean, they are trying to do that. They're trying to do it and get scored on it by the OBR. So they're trying
to do it. But, Jeremy Hunt was talking about the Edinburgh reforms. You remember them? There's a whole lot of things they've been trying to do in the city pretty much since we left the EU, and so few of them have been done. And that's deregulation is probably as useful to our economy as any tax break. And it's something we have to look at because we have regulated ourselves into a corner.
The conflict comes when you're saying to businesses, come and invest. We've got an infrastructure problem in this country. We want you to build here. We need roads. We need nuclear power. We need wind farms. We need companies. But then on the other hand, and you say we need pension funds. And then on the other hand, it's slightly contradictory then, possibly, if you have this other messaging that's happening.
But I mean, deregulation is always spoken about in the sort of the language of, well, regulation is just kind of bad. Isn't regulation about protecting
there is
people
some level of it.
and stopping disasters and scandals like the 2008 financial crash? And, you know, regulation in all sorts of fields is basically about saving lives, stopping malpractice. I mean, it's not all bad, is it?
It's not all bad. And from a city perspective, it really helps you. You know, clients are more inclined to invest in your fund if they feel that there is someone regulating it. But regulating it to the point where they know that you are not stealing their money, but you shouldn't regulate to stop people losing money. You know, if you've made a risk, if you've understood the risk of what you're investing in and it goes down, that's your problem. And many people I know are getting debanked because it's just... And people say, oh, it's political, and it's going, no, it's not political. It's just that once you are a public person, the extra paperwork the bank has to do to keep your account open is more than it's worth to them, unless you're borrowing a lot of money and they're going to make a lot of interest on you. It's just too expensive to bother. And people take it personally, and you're going, no, it's actually just profit and loss account. Someone in the accounts department went, it costs us £2,000 to keep this account open and we're only making £1,000 on it, therefore we're closing the account. And that's because of the paperwork, that's because of know your client, that's all of that stuff.
James?
Just not convinced that making it cheaper for a very wealthy person to open a bank account is going to do very much for most of the people out here. Look, there's a sort of fundamentally different vision of what the economy is doing and how it operates and ultimately who it works for that's at work here. Like a version, and my problem really with deregulation is, okay, fine, we'll slash and burn loads of regulations all over the place. You've mentioned a few, make it cheaper to open bank accounts, that sort of thing. It's like it doesn't address the underlying problems we're up against in this country, which is actually, I think, increasingly now a problem of demand. That people are spending more and more money on stuff that doesn't do much for their local economy, that is, for instance, spending more and more on food, more and more on electricity, on gas, on some of that, even on those taxes that people are starting to feel the pinch on. You're not addressing that if you're saying, what can we do about a sort of distant supply side problem in the financial system, which is that it costs less to open a bank account in UAE than in London, which to me feels like you're not getting to the heart of the problem here. So the issue with deregulation is that you get a lot of talk about this, and it looks like, exactly as you said, hey, it's all free, and we should just do this stuff. First of all, it doesn't really happen, at least not on the scale where it's, okay, here's a real big bang, we'll rip up everything. We're going full Javier Milei right now. That's what we're going to do.
They're trying to rip up everything on planning, to your point, Krish, which is that regulation clearly is there to protect people. It's about getting the balance and the incentives right.
Well, have you looked at the sort of annual general report of a major house builder like Barratt Homes? It's about 100 pages, over 50 pages of it is its green agenda, but it comes down to working out how much CO2 emissions were in the building of the home, right down to how far their workforce had to travel to get to the site. And it's like, no, we really need the houses. So can we stop tying them up in really this minutiae? Because everything that you build a house with, bricks, cement, steel, they are all quite CO2 intensive to produce, but they last a long time. If you build it, I mean, I live in a house that was built almost 200 years ago, and it's still doing really well. And it was built out of pretty much the same stuff, bricks and mortar, probably wood rather than cement, but, you know, it's along that line. So we are looking too much at, say, the CO2 emissions at the tailpipe, as you say, rather than the length of how long will that house last. Are we building houses to last rather than...
Well, we're not building them at all.
Well, now we're not building, but half of that is because of the regulation of building and some of the taxes, the new landfill taxes, the fact that if you're over 18 metres, which I think is about 6 stories,
why have a private house builder at all? Why not just have a publicly owned house builder? If we want houses built fast, wouldn't this be the quick way to do it? If the government says we need houses built quickly,
well, then we
why
get
not
back
have a
to
publicly owned house builder?
the train line. I'm sorry, the government is not shown itself to be good
then
building.
Why
Show
have
me
them
one
depending
thing
on
they've
profits?
built that went on time and on budget.
But do we need do we need more houses to be built? Yes.
Yes.
Does that have to be done at a profit to a house builder? No, it doesn't. So why not just have a nationalised house builder if you're concerned about the speed
profit is a good
of
incentive. The profit
clearly it's not
incentive is a
working.
good incentive.
Let's come back and do a podcast about housing, but we've got to leave it there for now. But thank you very much indeed,
I'll bring my
all of
boxing
you,
gloves next time.
for this particular forecast. In a couple of days' time, we're going to be focusing on the politics of the budget rather than the economic ideas. But for now, bye-bye.